Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now before we get into today's video, I just want to make a very quick announcement. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody on the YouTube community section and on my Facebook page who gave me lots of feedback regarding channel membership levels. It's an idea that I've been playing around with a while. I had a rough outline and I put my ideas up on Facebook, and loads of people gave me lots and lots of comments and lots of feedback. Really honest, and it was so helpful. So just want to say huge thank you to everybody who gave some feedback. You've given me a huge amount to think about, and I'm going to be doing a massive rethink on how I'm going to be approaching channel membership. So thank you for that. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, it's why I love you guys. I know I can come to my community, and I know that you guys will give me some great, honest feedback. Secondly, I want to say a huge thank you to Michael McGreevy for sending in some awesome pictures of his Imperial Guard battling out against some Chaos Knights. Sadly, the Guard did not prevail, but they did go down swinging, and it was hilarious to know that 2 of the big knights and 2 war dogs were brought down by lasguns. Yeah, this is just it now, guys. Lasguns are our best anti-armor capabilities. If you roll enough shots, they're going to have to roll enough saves. Just thanks to Hammer of the Emperor. Just absolutely fantastic. So huge thank you to Mike for sending this picture in. If anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, please post them on my Facebook page, or you can email them to me at mordianglorytv@gmail.com. Without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. So today, guys, let's talk about Bullgryns. What was once a premier guard unit that you would see in many competitive lists. I myself own 9 Bullgryn, 8 Ogryn, because sometimes you just need 15 just combat brutes on the battlefield. And they were for such a long time a staple of so many competitive guard units. We're talking all through 8th, all through 9th. Bullgryns were such a great unit. But recently, you haven't been seeing them. And they have definitely taken a bit of a fall from grace. And so what I want to do today, guys, is just analyse the Bullgryn, where it is in the current meta, why it's no longer the premier unit, and in my opinion, why they're definitely no longer a must-have unit in your list. Okay, it's a sad time, but let's take a look at all the reasons why this is the case. So, firstly, let's just quickly go over what the heck a Bullgryn is. It is a close combat brute unit. It's also a highly defensible unit. Okay. The Bullgryn has essentially 2 key functions to perform in the guard. It needs to be able to soak up a huge amount of damage, and it needs to be able to dish out a lot of damage, or at the very least be a threat of dishing out a lot of damage. And if it isn't performing either one of those, then it's not doing its job. Okay. Now, for a long time, Bullgryn were essentially a really good distraction card effect style unit for guard. And a distraction card effects is, guys, it's an old term that's kind of used from sort of 4th, 5th edition Tyranids, where you could take a really cheap card effect and just launch it towards the enemy, and the enemy had to deal with it, because if they didn't, it was going to kill them. But it wasn't that many points for your list that if they did kill it that you cared. It was literally just a massive distraction, but it was a deadly distraction. And so that is, for a long time, another sort of thing that sort of Bullgryns were able to do. Now the problem is that Bullgryn have kind of been left behind. They're no longer dirt cheap in comparison to some of the stuff that's out there. Their combat potential is now fairly mediocre against a lot of armies. And lastly, they aren't as durable as they once were relative to the meta. So let's look at that first one, the distraction card effects. At the end of the day, guys, if you need to run an effective Bullgryn mob, you've got to run at least 6. 3 just isn't enough. 3, 4, 5, yeah, maybe 6 is really a minimum viable unit. And honestly, you probably want to be looking at 7, 8, and maybe even 9 Bullgryn. But if you're taking any less than that, they just don't have that threat potential. They're just and they're going to take a lot of damage on the way in, so that they're not going to do as much damage when they get there. So when you look at that, you're like, okay, well, 6 Bullgryn, well, they're 35 points a pop. So that's like a 210 point unit. That's okay. But, that is 10% of my army, when I'm looking at, over 10% of my army. And then you're like, okay, well, what else can I get for 210 points? And you start thinking, well, I can get a tank commander for 210 points. I could almost get 2 basilisks for that. I can get a basilisk and a half. I can get a manticore. I can get 3 mortar pits. I can get like 3 thud guns, or two and a bit thud guns. Quad mortars for those of you for the modern viewer. Thudguns is the old Krieg term for them. But there's a lot of other stuff out there that is kind of just as durable, because tank commanders have got a 2-up save as well now, except for they can sit back and shoot a bit further, so that's another point in their favour. And you can repair tank commanders quite easily with like a tech priest. There you go. You could take a tank commander and a tech priest for the same price as your Bullgryns. That's not great. And and if you start talking about like a full squad of Bullgryns, you look at like a 300 point unit, 305 point unit. You can get a hell of a lot for 3. And then of course you've got to take a priest with them, because the Bullgryns without the priest, they do a decent amount of damage, but you notice it when you've not got the priest in there. But it's like having 2 extra Bullgryns for the price of 1 Bullgryn. So now you're looking at a 350 point unit roughly. And so 350 points, well, that's 2 Manticores with change. That's almost 3 Basilisks. That's mortars and thud guns. And so you start realising, like, they're not that cheap anymore relative to what else is out there. And not just relative to what's in your army, relative to what's in other people's armies as well. A Terminator is 38 points. Basically the same price. Terminators have got good guns. Bullgryns don't have any guns worth mentioning. Terminators have got a 2-up save. But guess what? They've got a better than a 2-up save, because they've got Armour of Contempt now. Bullgryn, they just have a 2-up save. That's it. You could increase that save with, you could get pseudo Armour of Contempt on there by putting Psychic Barrier on them, but then you're paying for another 35 point Astropath. So now your unit's starting to get really expensive. Okay, so now you're looking at like almost a 400 point unit if you've got an Astropath, a Priest, and 9 Bullgryn. And if you want to be able to do Night Shroud on them as well, then you are looking at literally over 400 point unit. Okay, to give them an extra -1 to hit. So you compare it to like a Terminator who can shoot better, has better leadership, is just as good in combat. A Terminator's got like 3 attacks in combat with like a Power Fist. Oh yeah, it's -1 to hit, but it's not, because you spend 1 CP on Fury of the First, and it's not -1 to hit. There's especially there's loads of ways for Marines to get +1 attack on, or some kind of buff on those Terminators. You've got Blood Angels who get +1 to wound. You've got Space Wolves who get that +1 to hit. You've got Black Templars who you can put the Fires of Devotion on them to get an extra attack. There's loads of ways you can buff those Terminators. Loads and loads of ways. And so their defensive output is just as good, if not better, because of the Stormbolters, as the tactical doctrine on the Stormbolters. It's pretty good, right? So you've got all this. You've got all these buffs that you can put on the Terminators, and they're the same price as a Bullgryn. And Terminators are a thing now. Terminators weren't a thing, but Terminators are a thing now because of Armour of Contempt. You're seeing all sorts of armies bringing the Terminators out. Grey Knights, Thousand Suns, Death Guard. Everyone, Sanguinary Guard for your Blood Angels. Everyone's bringing the Terminators out now, or the Terminator equivalent models out. Bullgryns do have some pretty good offensive capabilities on paper. They have 3 attacks each. When they charge, they get an extra attack. If you've got a priest nearby, they get an extra attack. There's loads of things that make them look great on paper. And you look at their weapon and you're like, okay, it's strength 7, it's obviously we're talking about the club here, no one takes the grenadier lump more. But it's strength 7, it's it's AP 1, which is okay, and it's 2 damage. I mean, that's a respectable profile. But it's not. Because the problem you have is that AP -1, how many times do I have to mention it in videos, guys? AP -1 is useless now. Armour of Contempt is just going to come along and just take your AP -1 and chuck it in the bin and stamp on it and set the bin on fire and then laugh at you and go, no. That's what Armour of Contempt does to AP 1 weapons now. Okay, imagine that's what's going to happen to you every time you use a Bullgryn, and you wouldn't be far off. That's how you're going to feel. So that's a problem. And then of course there's still huge prevalences of reduced damage by 1. I mean, it's not as prevalent as it once was, don't get me wrong, when everyone and their mum was running Dreadnoughts, but it's still there. It's still a big thing. And despite the fact that Death Guard are, for some reason, not doing as well as they really, really should be, they're still a really common army to face at a tournament. If you go to a tournament, I would say you have a 60-70% chance that you're going to face a Death Guard army. It's more often than not you're going to go to tournament and face a Death Guard army. If it's a 2-day tournament, you're pretty much guaranteed to face them once. There's a really popular army, and they're relatively sort of easy to pilot, and they're relatively low model count. They're relatively cheap to get into. So if you face Death Guard, good. You know, let me just tell you. You try and send your Bullgryns in to a blob of Blight Lord Terminators, to a blob of Death Shroud Terminators. You send your Bullgryns in against them, and you see who comes out on top. Because I guarantee you, it's not going to be your Bullgryn, because you're going to do no damage to them. And you know they're going to be on a 2-up save, and they're going to be putting you on like a 4-up or a 5-up save, and you're going to be like 1 damage a weapon, and they're just going to be killing Bullgryn left, right, and centre. I think they've got weapons that can go up to like 3 damage. It's just insane. Just everyone that goes through, oh yeah, you lost a Bullgryn. Oh yeah, you lost a Bullgryn. It's just like, Jesus. You know, Death Guard are scary. You know, and their Terminators are good. So there's an example of why Bullgryn, just their offensive capabilities aren't that great. So what they're kind of relegated to now is almost like a bullying unit, where it's like, okay, so you can't really send Bullgryn up against other combat units, but you could send them up against something that doesn't like to be in combat. So, for example, if you went into like Tau Crisis suits or something like that, you could probably beat the ever-living daylights out of some Tau Crisis suits or some other infantry or whatever. And that's kind of where they're at. But it's like, well, at the end of the day, do I want to spend 400 points? Obviously, I'm exactly fine. Let's between 300 and 400 points on a unit that can beat the crap out of units that aren't very good in combat. And it's like, I don't know. It doesn't sound very good, does it? I mean, if I'm guard, I'll just shoot them to death because I like shooting them. Do you know what I mean? Leave the combat armies to bully people. I'm a shooting army. I could spend 400 points on this Bullgryn Death Star to absolutely beat the shit out of some Fire Warriors. I could do that. Or I could just mortar them and do exactly the same thing. I'll just take 3 squads of mortars. I'm Cadian. I'll put a platoon commander there. And for what, like 175 points? I'm just going to... And because Pathfinders like have to come in like squads of 10 now. I'm just going to blow the crap out of them. I'm just going to kill them all. You know, and you know, that's half the point. And we're not even, even if I don't kill them all, it's half the point. And my mortars are just perfectly safe because they're behind cover, and Tau don't take that much to ignore line of sight anymore after the nerf. They still take some, don't get me wrong, but they don't get as much. So yeah, kind of, but what, or like I said, take a couple of tank commanders. I'm pretty sure a couple of tank commanders are going to be able to do the same job. So really what it comes down to is, are Bullgryn a good defensive unit now? Are Bullgryn a good defensive unit? And here, I think they still retain a decent, like a modicum of effectiveness here. Okay, so Bullgryn can still be put onto a 1-up save. If they're in cover, they're still on a 0-up save. If they've got Night Shroud on them, they're on a 0-up save, plus they've got a -1 to hit. And if they're in like dense terrain as well, then even if someone's got like a +1, they're still hitting with like a -1. Bullgryn are a fantastic defensive unit, and they still do that job really, really well. The problem is that the lethality of 40k has really gone through the roof. It's really, really gone through the roof. And so their relative defensiveness is not what it once was. I mean, at the end of the day, if a bunch of Eldar want to come along and bladestorm the crap out of you, they're probably going to. It's tricky to say. They're they are still really durable, and I think that's. And I'm actually not going to say anything too bad about the durability. 40k has got very, very lethal, evidenced by the fact that I took 365 conscripts into a game and got tabled. But I think Bullgryns are still a really, really good defensive unit. The problem you'll have with them is that they're slow. And this kind of ties into their offensive capabilities as well. But the reason why the slowness is a bit of a problem is that, I'm not just talking like mentally slow, I'm talking like they move around slowly. I don't know if I meant to say that. That's probably not politically correct, but anyway. They're slow. And the reason why that's a problem is that if they're going to be a defensive unit, one of two things is going to happen. One, they're not going to get into combat, and they're just going to spend the whole game getting kited and picked off that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if they're sat on an objective having a great time, then they're kind of doing their job. They can spend the whole game getting picked off, not kill anything, but if they score you like 15 points, that's pretty good, right? But the problem is that they are slow, so they're not going to pick their fights, which means if someone wants to come and fight you, more than likely they're going to get the drop on you. And if they get the drop on you, you're going to take, it means you're not going to be operating at full strength. And also, more than likely, if someone is committing to jumping on top of your Ogre and killing them, your Bullgryn and killing them, I should say, unless they're making a mistake, at which point it's, you know, well done for them. But unless they're making a mistake, they're only going to jump on your Ogre or your Bullgryn, I should say, when they're manageable or when they think they're going to win the fight. So that's kind of the problem. But they are still a fantastic defensive unit, and nobody really wants to charge a big unit of Bullgryn. Nobody really wants to. They'll whittle them down first, but the problem is that they'll probably whittle them down. And the moment you get below a certain amount of like Bullgryn, like maybe you get sort of 4 or 5 of them, they're just not as powerful as they once were. But what I would say is they are certainly still a great defensive unit. Now, all of this taken into account, it sounds like it's pretty bad for Bullgryn, and you know what? I think it is pretty bad for him. I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't be I'm not considering taking them in any serious list. You know, if I can cobble together 27 Bullgryn and run them in a meme list at an event, I'll do it, right? And maybe it'll be amazingly effective. It'll just totally skew the game and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I don't really see it happening. So what I would say is, if you like Bullgryn, that's great, but make sure you're taking them with a good purpose in mind, because otherwise I don't think you're going to be finding them as effective. I could be totally wrong though. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are you a big fan of Bullgryn? Have you started taking them? Am I like totally off my rocker here? Or do you agree with me? What are the reasons you think that Bullgryn has started losing favour? Let me know down in the comment section below. Before we end today's video, I want to say a huge thank you to all of the channel Patreon supporters. It's thanks to my channel Patreons that I'm still able to keep this channel going, and that's no exaggeration. Increasing cost of models, increasing cost of tournaments, general cost of living, all that kind of stuff makes it kind of difficult to be able to go to tournaments off my own back. And it's thanks to the Patreons that I am able to still afford to do all this kind of stuff and bring you back real world tactics. This isn't a theory ham video. I've been running Bullgryn, and there's a reason I've stopped running them. Okay, and it's thanks to my patrons that I'm able to bring these real world tactics, real world insights to you guys. So massive thank you to the current Patreon supporters. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, there's a link down in the description below. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.